If your child has been described as difficult, distracted, emotionally sensitive, or just not trying hard enough, and something about that description has never felt right to you, I want to talk to you today. Not because I can tell you what's going on with your child from a video, I can't, but because there are patterns I see in clinic across a lot of children that tend to come before those labels do. And parents who recognize those patterns early are in a much better position than those who don't. My name is Ibrahim. I'm a nurse practitioner and registered psychotherapist. I specialize in neurodevelopmental assessments for children and adults in Ottawa and Toronto and virtually across Ontario. This channel exists to give parents the kind of clinical information that usually only shows up after a referral, after a wait list, after months of not knowing. I would rather you have it now. Let's start with the word lazy, because it's the one I hear most. When a child consistently underperforms relative to what their intelligence suggests they're capable of, the explanation is almost never laziness. What I more often see when I sit with that child in a clinical context is a nervous system that burns through significantly more energy than average just to sustain attention. These children are not avoiding effort. They are often exhausted by the effort that attention requires, and the output doesn't reflect that cost. The same is true for disruptive. A child who is consistently moving, interrupting, blurting things out, or struggling to wait their turn is not, in most cases, a child who doesn't care about rules. What I often observe is a child who is acutely aware of the rules and genuinely cannot consistently apply the braking system that would let them follow those rules in real time. That brake, the inhibitory control system, is exactly what we assess when we look at ADHD, and its absence looks from the outside like defiance. From the inside, it's something quite different. Now, I want to talk about sensitivity because this one is most misunderstood and often points at somewhere very specific. When a child is described as overly sensitive, what adults are usually noticing is one of few things: meltdowns that seem disproportionate to the trigger, an inability to transition between activities without significant distress, very strong responses to sensory input, sounds, texture, crowds, unexpected touch, or an intense, almost consuming focus on specific interests paired with difficulty shifting attention to other things. These patterns, taken together, often point towards the autism spectrum. Not in every case, but consistently enough that when I hear, "she's just so sensitive," I start asking specific questions. Here is something that matters for parents of girls in particular. ADHD and autism present differently across genders, and the diagnostic criteria that most people are familiar with were developed primarily on male populations. Girls with ADHD are more likely to internalize, to present as anxious, dreamy, or scattered, rather than visibly hyperactive. Girls on the autism spectrum are more likely to mask. to imitate the social behaviors of peers closely enough that the underlying difficulty isn't obvious until the child is exhausted, distressed, or in a context that strips the social script away. These children get missed, and they get missed for years. I want to be careful here because I am describing patterns, not making diagnoses. Every child is different. Not every child who struggles with attention has ADHD. Not every child who is sensitive is autistic. But here's the clinical reality. When these patterns are persistent across settings, across time, across multiple relationships, they warrant a proper look. And the proper look means a formal assessment, not a conversation, not a checklist from the internet, not a teacher's opinion. Let me tell you what a formal assessment actually involves, because most parents don't know. A comprehensive neurodevelopmental assessment, whether we're looking at ADHD, autism, or both, involves a detailed clinical history from the parents, teachers, direct clinical observation of the child, cognitive and behavioral testing, and a synthesis of all that information into a diagnostic formulation. It takes time, multiple appointments, and the output is a report that gives the child, the family, and the school a clear clinical picture and set of specific recommendations. This is the part that parents who have been through the public system often need to hear. In Ontario, the public pathway for neurodevelopmental assessment is real, and it's valuable. But for many families, the wait is long. Children grow. Grade 2 becomes grade 4. What was a manageable challenge becomes an academic and social accumulation that's much harder to unpack. I'm not here to criticize the public system. It serves an important function. But I'm here to say that private assessment exists and it's available. And that for families who are in a position to pursue it. The timeline is weeks rather than years. I also want to talk about what happens after an assessment, because sometimes parents are reluctant to move forward because they're worried about what a diagnosis means. Here is what I observe clinically. A diagnosis doesn't limit a child. In most cases, it opens doors. It gives the child language for their own experience. It gives the parents a framework that replaces guilt and confusion with understanding. It gives the school a legal basis for implementing accommodations, and it gives everyone involved a direction for support rather than a cycle of consequences that don't change anything. The children I worry about most in clinics are not the ones who were assessed. They are the ones who weren't, who spent their school years being managed, redirected, and disciplined without anyone understanding what was actually happening for them neurologically. Some of those children develop secondary anxiety. Some develop shame narratives about their own intelligence or character that take years to unpack in therapy as an adult. Early assessment and early support change those trajectories. That's not a promise, it's a pattern I see in the literature and in the clinic. Here's a question I want to put directly to parents. What is your child's experience of school right now? Not their grades, their experience. Do they wake up dreading it? Do they come home emotionally dysregulated? Do they describe themselves as stupid or weird or bad? Because children who are neurologically different in ways that aren't understood or supported often develop narratives about themselves that are far more damaging than any diagnostic label. A label, properly explained, gives a child a map. The alternative, no label, no map, often means a child concludes that the problem is them. I want to shift now to what this actually looks like when a family comes to see us. When a family books a child neurodevelopmental assessment at Crocus Care, the process starts before the first appointment. We send out clinical questionnaires for the parents and for the teachers. These give us a baseline picture of how the child is functioning across different environments, because ADHD and autism are both context sensitive in how they present. What we see at home and what we see at school and what we see in clinic can be quite different. We need all three pictures. The assessment itself typically involves 2 to 3 appointments. The first is primarily with the parents, detailed history, pregnancy and developmental milestones, family history, school history, and the specific concerns that brought them in. The second involves direct clinical interaction with a child. The third, if needed, is a feedback and recommendations session where we talk through the findings, what they mean, and what the next steps are. The full report is prepared after all clinical information has been gathered. We assess children in Ottawa, in Toronto, and virtually across Ontario. Virtual assessment has become a well-validated methodology. There are specific protocols for conducting neurodevelopmental assessments remotely that are recognized in the clinical literature for families outside major centers or for children who find clinical environments activating. Virtual assessment is a real and clinically rigorous option. I want to say something about the cost because I know it's a real consideration. A comprehensive child neurodevelopmental assessment at Crocus Care is $2,500, and I'm not going to pretend that's a small number for most families. It's $2,500 as of today, June 6, 2026. What I can tell you is what that number represents: a multi-appointment process with a regulated clinician, standardized testing, collateral reporting from school, a comprehensive written report, and feedback session. If a diagnosis is reached, that report supports school accommodation requests, possibly a letter to OAP for a wait list, OHIP, maybe OHIP funding for specific services, and in some cases, DTC eligibility, disability tax credit eligibility. The report has a function well beyond the assessment itself. For families who are uncertain about whether assessment is the right step, we also offer consultation appointments, shorter, lower cost conversations where we can review what a family is observing and help them understand whether a full assessment is clinically indicated. I would rather a family make an informed decision than feel pressured to commit before they understand what they're committing to. One thing I want to mention specifically for multilingual families, and there are a lot of them in Ottawa and Toronto. I conduct clinical work in English, Russian, Azerbaijani, and Turkish. And I have colleagues that support me at the clinic and who are bilingual in English and French. When a parent can describe their child's development in their first language, the clinical picture we get is richer and more accurate. If language has been a barrier to seeking assessment in the past, I want you to know it doesn't have to be. I want to close by coming back to where we started. If your child has been described as lazy, disruptive, or too sensitive, and something about that description has never felt right, your instinct is worth taking seriously. Parents who know their child most often know, before the assessment confirms it, that something is being missed. The assessment doesn't replace your knowledge of your child, it adds clinical precision to it. And clinical precision leads to better support, better understanding, and eventually a child who feels seen rather than managed. If you're ready to take the next step, or if you just want to understand what assessment would look like for your child, the link is in the description. You will find us at child.crocuscare.ca, Ottawa, Toronto, and virtually across Ontario. The first step is a short intake form. We will reach out within 1 business day. Your child doesn't need another year of being misunderstood. Let's find out what's actually going on.